Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. So this is the second episode of Kashkūl Colloquia Islamica, and today I am very pleased to welcome my very good friend, Wahid Azal from Australia. Wahid is an independent scholar, and his great expertise is in Shihāb al-Dīn al-Suhrawardī, whom we're going to talk about today. But I should add that Wahid is also an expert on the history of the Baha'is, as well as the Bayan and the Bayanis, or also known as the Babis, but that's a whole other topic. And Wahid also is the head of the Fatimiyya Sufi Tariqa, and he has spent many years researching Shihāb al-Dīn al-Suhrawardī. And today we would like to look at Shihāb al-Dīn al-Suhrawardī in more detail, but especially a dimension of his life and work, which of late, or for far too long, remained somewhat neglected. What I like to call the theurgic dimension of Shihāb al-Dīn al-Suhrawardī, especially his special invocations to what I would refer to as the planetary intelligences, but I'll leave Wahid to elaborate on that himself. I think it's very interesting that Shihāb al-Dīn al-Suhrawardī has been neglected in this way. He was, of course, given a great deal of attention and really brought his attention was brought to the world or the wider world outside of the Islamic world, especially the Persianate world, by the French Orientalist Henri Corbin and in his work. And Corbin did, in the relevant volume of his book on Iranian Islam, which is written in French, on Islam Iranien, talk about Suhrawardī and also this dimension. Oddly enough, I think that volume has been translated into English, like unofficially. It's floating around on the web as under the heading of Suhrawardī and the Persian Platonists. And somewhere in there is a footnote to this dimension of Suhrawardī, his Kitab al-Waridat wa Taqdisat, if I'm not mistaken, by Corbin, but he doesn't really follow up on it in his later career, and it's sort of forgotten. And even though, Sayyid Hussein Nasr then worked for many years to get out the complete works of Shihāb al-Dīn al-Suhrawardī, at least in the edition that I have, which was printed, or well, it was originally published, it's been printed many times since then, but originally published in the heyday of what at that time was called the Imperial Iranian Academy of Philosophy, under the patronage of none other than the Shah Banu herself, and of course run by the very supercilious Sayyid Hussein Nasr. And but that volume never made it in there. And now I don't know what even now, I think there has been a kind of complete works of the Shaykh al-Ishraq, as he is known, published in Iran, but I don't know if that volume or if that part of his work has been published. Is that so? Sure, but let me, before I talk, I want to just sacralize our talk with the proceed, please. With the short exordium of the Shaykh al-Ishraq himself from the Hikmat al-Ishraq, where he said, Jalla dhikraka Allahumma, wa azama qudsaka, wa azza jaruka, wa allat subhatika, wa ta'ala jaddaka, wa sallallahu mustafinika, wa ahla risalatika umuman, wa khususan ala Muhammad al-Mustafa, Sayyid al-Bashar, wa shafi al-Mushaffa, fil mahshar, alayhi wa alayhim salam. Yep. Yes. Very good. To begin, or amma ba'd, to begin, Corbin actually translated parts of the Kitab al-Waridat al-Taqdisat. In fact, he was the first Western scholar, together with Paul Krauss, that indicated this very important work of the Shaykh al-Ishraq. And in one of the treatises of the Archange Impropre, the Crimson Archangel. Yes, where he in Persian, right? At-Nasur, where he translated all of the visionary treatises of Suhrawardī. He also included a kind of an anthology of sections of the Waridat, together with a very important in French, together with a very interesting analytical
introduction, where he actually, analyzes in his Corbinian way most of these prayers and situates it, as it were, in the way that Corban meant by that.
Yeah.
These prayers. And although he doesn't say this, he kind of alludes to it that, one cannot really approach the central corpus of the writings of Suhrawardī, whether we're talking about the Hikmat al-Ashraq or these visionary treatises, without recourse to this. And that he indicates that this is a sort of prophetic text. Now, what does that mean?
Yeah.
We all know that the central aim of the Suhrawardian theosophy of light is ta'alluq. Ta'alluq, probably the best translation would be theurgy, or the theurgical craft. This was
to theosis,
or theosis. Theosis, yeah.
Yeah,
as an active.
I got that off of Saiyad Rizvi. I don't know if he invented it, but
yes.
he well had, yeah.
Yeah, theosis. Well, I mean, theurgy being the path, theosis being the goal.
Yeah.
Where then the theosopher or the hakim becomes a muta'allih, someone who is theosicized, as or to use that English word, or coin one. So this is a very important element of Suhrawardī that is very neglected. Like, for example, even in the introduction by Hossein Ziai and John Walbridge, their edition of the Hikmat al-Ashraq, in the introduction, they kind of dismiss this stuff. They say, for example, one thing that Walbridge say in the intro, that these visionary treatises are actually, of no account to the overall philosophical project of, they're just flourishes,
But one might observe here that Dimitri Gutas is to Ibn Sina as Walbridge Ziai is to Suhrawardī.
I would say more Walbridge than Ziai. I mean, I was briefly Ziai's grad student, and I had extensive discussions, debates, arguments with him inside and outside of his office about this stuff, and Corban and Suhrawardī. And, to be fair to the memory of the man, Ziai had his reservations about Corban, some of which are to some degree, in my opinion, valid, but he was not on a campaign against Henry Corban.
Mm-hmm.
Walbridge is on that campaign, against Henry Corban, very, very markedly too. But this statement by them in the introduction to their edition of the Philosophy of Illumination, or Hikmat al-Ashraq, is quite revealing, because when one reads, whether, the logical section of the Hikmat al-Ashraq, the first section of the book, goes into the second section of the book, which deals with the lights, there is a lot of echoes to these things that occur in the visionary treatise, particularly the Tale of the Occidental Exile, but more so the overtly ecstatic elements that we find in the Waridat wa Taqdisat itself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this text of the Waridat wa Taqdisat itself is basically divided into two sections, or the way that it has been compiled is in two sections. One is a sort of a revelatory section, beginning with this Raqim al-Muqaddas, and what Corban has then labeled the litanies that then follow it, where that the soul begins its ascent through the celestial spheres. And then the following section are the actual prayers. So you have prayers, or the Taqdisat, as it's correctly labeled, where there's a daily prayer to God, then the seven intelligences, etc. And then there's a longer one that incorporates all of these elements. One I did a critical text of. And then there is a prayer to the perfect nature, the Tibaatan, etc. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's interesting you bring up Walbridge in the context of the coming to light of these texts of Suhrawardī. And you rightly said, you reminded me of how extracts were published in the French edition of the al-Surh, or the Crimson Archangel. But then it seems to me that there really wasn't any serious attention given to this. And then all of a sudden, decades later, Walbridge, in a piece which he wrote for some sort of a publication, which I think is published in Russian and some other languages, but I think it's put out by an Estonian fellow named Yanis Estos or Estos. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, and if you're listening, forgive me. I'm really not sure how that's pronounced. but it's published, and I saw it on the web with the Cyrillic script and everything. But there's multilingual submissions, and Walbridge had something there, and he nowhere credits
Corban.
Walbridge. And you called him out on that on your blog, which I can't find anymore, your blog, but you called him out on that. And of course there was nothing. And then I think there was a brief mention, albeit it wasn't in a scholarly publication or any kind of publication that had even any pretensions to being a scholarly publication, published by Zia Inayat Khan of the
Sufi Order of the West,
Sufi Islamia Ruhaniyat Society, or whatever it's being called now. He's the son of Pir Vilayat, who's the son of Hazrat Inayat Khan, etc., etc. And there was some sort of an English version in that.
It wasn't a translation. This was a translation done by one of the murids of the Sufi Order, one of Pir Zia Inayat Khan's murids.
Right.
It was a kind of a poetic rendition of the Tadlisat.
Yes.
But even though it was a poetic rendition, it actually paid far more closer attention to the only text that was available to this gentleman, Jamal Atala. Details that Walbridge missed. By the way, that review I did of Walbridge's article is actually on my Academia EDU page. So
okay, good. So listeners can find that if they just search your name N Wahid Azal on academia.edu.
Academia, you can find that review.
Yeah.
But Walbridge, I mean, despite the fact that he did not give a single citation to Henry Corbin, who'd already done work in this area several times in Islam Iranian and also in the Archangel, didn't read the manuscript of the Hagia Sophia manuscript on the section dealing with the prayer to Venus correctly. And this was mind-boggling to me. He says that Suhrawardī calls the planetary intelligence of Venus Osman, a name of unknown origin, when actually when you read the manuscript it's Arman Asbahar, which is the correct Pahlavi designation for Venus.
Right.
And that just blew me away, that this is one of the most eminent scholars of Islamic philosophy, purportedly an expert on Suhrawardī, was who's had access to far more of these manuscripts than I have had, yet is incapable of correctly reading a very critical part of a manuscript that he's trained to read.
That certainly doesn't inspire confidence, but it also begs the question that if Walbridge is completely discounting this dimension or ignoring this dimension of Suhrawardī, then why all of a sudden in that issue of Ishraq does he decide to call attention to it?
Well, I was after these manuscripts for a long time, and Walbridge knew about it as well. Luckily, Zia Inayat Khan, I owe him, because he sent me the first copy of the manuscript, the Hagia Sophia manuscript. He actually sent me the copy of it, the scanned copy of it. So, I fully acknowledge his help in all of this. And because they had only recently published that, that poetic rendition by Jamal Atala, I saw it, I wrote his office. I said, look, if you have access to this manuscript, can I please have a copy? Because I have been trying, through my own facility to get it from the Turks, and they're not giving it out. And he did. Immediately, he got his secretary to, scan the manuscript, and they sent it out to me. And that was the only manuscript I had, and other than Corbin's French, there was nothing else until probably around 2013, 2014. My friend at the Digital Occult Manuscripts Library found the Raghib Pasha manuscript, which is the oldest manuscript of the complete works of Suhrawardī that we have. It's not the oldest manuscript of a Suhrawardī work. The oldest would be the Hagia Sophia Waradat manuscript. Right. This is the oldest manuscript of the compiled works of Suhrawardī. Then a few years after that, even though I had friends of mine who were trying to get these 3 or rather 4 manuscripts from the Topkapi library, finally a friend, here in Australia, a scholar, managed to get their hands on these 4 manuscripts for me. So then we have
really hard to get things out of the Topkapi, in my experience. Others, because now everything is either in the Suleymaniya Kutubhanise or the Bayezid, and they've been pretty, I've done work there on Ibn al-Arabi and other things, and I've never really had any problems. But Topkapi Sarai is another matter. And a lot of people also don't know that there's, other than those, everything actually didn't make it into the Sulaymaniyah. There's stuff all over the place, and it all depends. And sometimes it depends. I mean, you might go 1 year, go back a couple of years later, and maybe the admin people have changed, and you just never know. It's that actually did happen to me once on one occasion in connection with some Buni manuscripts. But anyway, that's another topic. So you're very fortunate that you were able to get those.
Finally, I mean, but there apparently are other manuscripts. There is manuscripts in Iran. For example, there is this one lithograph edition of Mullah Sadra's Ta'liqat ala Hikmat al-Ishraq that has the prayers in the margins of the text.
Yeah. You know who has that?
Yes, our friend. Yeah.
Our friend says Saiyad Rizvi,
yes.
and he scanned a page and sent it to you, which you had up on your blog.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
He's actually agreed to let me photocopy that, but we've never gotten the chance to do it. And now with COVID and all that, last time I was in the UK, I was just there just before all of this COVID business began, almost exactly a year ago.
So is this copy a photocopy, or is it the original lithograph?
No, my understanding is he's got an original litho. Anyway, so yeah, so that's very interesting. So my question is then, has any kind of a proper critical edition on the basis of all of these or any manuscripts of these theurgic texts of Shihāb Din Suhrawardī Maqtūl come out in Iran as part of the complete works?
Mr. Muhammad Maliki, a Suhrawardī scholar who's also attached to one of the seminaries in one of the houses in Qom. Yeah. He began a project called the Hikmat al-Ishraqiyya. Back in, the first I heard of it was back in 2011. And I started corresponding with him. He then published a book called Niyayesh Facets. He promised to send me a copy. He never did. Our friend Habib sent me a copy of it finally.
Okay.
But I think he didn't really go past 1 or 2 or 3 volumes of it. I've heard different stories. One individual said that they actually finished the project, but in limited edition, and that so this was like 14 volumes of critical text. But yeah. I've never been clear as to whether these texts of the prayers were included within it, because when I spoke to Mr. Maliki, he got the manuscript, the Hagia Sophia manuscript from me.
Okay, so you got in touch with Allah Maliki, yeah.
Yeah, he got the Hagia Sophia manuscript from me, and then whether he managed to obtain any of the Topkapi or the Raghib Pasha manuscripts, I don't know.
I see. All right, so I think then there's work to be done.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done.
A lot of work.
Although, to give credit where credit is due, there is a dissertation that came out in 2019 by a Polish gentleman by the name of Łukasz Piatak. I guess that's how you pronounce his first name, Łukasz.
I don't know. Yeah.
This gentleman contacted me on his own behest in 2014 because I was putting out stuff on my Academia PDU page, basically fishing, trying to find out if I had all of the manuscripts. And at the time, I only had the Hagia Sophia. I mean, a few months later, I managed to get the Raghib Pasha manuscript as well. Yeah. Once he was satisfied that there was no one else with all of the manuscripts, he felt secure enough in his project, and then put out a dissertation that came out in 2019. I actually have it right here in front of me. Oh yeah. Entitled Between Philosophy, Mysticism, and Magic, a critical edition of the occult writings of and attributed to Shihāb al-Suhrawardī.
Okay, so this is in English.
This is in English, not a well-written English. The Arabic texts are however valuable. He has managed to do a critical text with all of the major manuscripts.
Was defended where? Excuse me.
This was defended at the University of Warsaw in 2018.
Okay, that's very recent.
And his advisor was one woman by the name of Katarzyna Pachniak. I think that's how she pronounces her first name.
Good. Right.
Yeah. So we do have these now, and I've noticed that people like Matt Melvin Kushki And also Jamal Elias have actually cited this dissertation in recent stuff that they have been putting out.
I see.
So, but the thing is that certain sections of this dissertation is basically arguing my points of departure in several things that I have published, but without giving any attribution. For example, I put a text up of the Arbaun Asma al-Idrisiya, the Idrisi prayer of the 40 names, where in the introduction I basically argued that this particular piece is in no way can it be attributed to Shīʿah Suhrawardī, because there is a much older pedigree that we find, especially from Shiite texts, showing that it actually may have originated in Imami sources, and that it's even been attributed to the Imams, if not to Hassan al-Basri, who predates Suhrawardī, obviously. So this, I actually, in my piece, I mentioned all the text and the genealogy, the possible genealogy of this particular prayer. I actually had informed Piatak in early 2015 about that he should check the Bihar al-Anwar in the section where Ibn Tawus's Muhajj al-Dawat is contained, to look at this argument, and so then trace the isnad of this particular prayer.
Yes,
and
he
never acknowledged me for that, and he also never acknowledged me for the fact that I put the first critical edition of the longer prayer to all of the souls and intelligences, etc., before he did, even though I sent a copy of it to him at the time. So this wasn't a competition. I even told him at the time that if he was interested, that I was happy to help him with the English of this thing. If he wanted to do translations, I was happy to do that. Then maybe sometime in the future we could collaborate and put an edition together. But he wanted to get to the finish line first, as it were. And then when I asked him why he didn't cite me, his response to me, well, your work is not official, whatever that means, even though it's been on academia for a couple of years.
Basically went out of your way, very much out of your way, to help this guy whom you've never met.
Yeah.
And he takes your work. I'm not going to say he steals it, but he uses, your work and your help, benefits from it. And he doesn't acknowledge you anywhere. Now, this is
it's bad form. He contacted, like I said, he contacted me himself. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this raises a lot of questions about what exactly is scholarship and who is a scholar, and what being official and or unofficial even means. One wonders, especially about a lot of these manuscripts, for example, which are there outside of the Islamic world, and one could argue, well, if the Brits hadn't stolen them, which in many cases what they did, or maybe they bought them, I don't know, but there's a lot of them that maybe they wouldn't have survived. Who knows? But the fact is that a lot of those are just completely displaced. They're out of their context, and then they're locked away. And there's all these gatekeepers in terms of who can see them, who can't see them, and so forth. But this whole question of who really, do you really have to have a Ph.D. In the subject? There's this dubious thing called peer review, right?
Oh God. Yeah.
So now, let's say you want to write something about Mullah Sadra. Let's take Suhrawardī for an example. Who in the world right now, in the Western world, really, if we really are honest about it, is in a position to peer review something on Mullah Sadra? Anybody in the Western Academy who has read Mullah Sadra cover to cover and knows it better than, let's say, Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh Amuli, or knows it better than, who's still alive, right?
Yes.
He's still alive. Who knows it better than Sayyid Jalaluddin Ashtiani, for example?
Rahmatullahi alayhi.
Or Sheikh Muhammad Rida al-Muzaffar. I really, find all of that. So even Kamal al-Haydari, I would say even Kamal al-Haydari. Really, it really boggles the mind.
It does boggle the mind. I've experienced this myself, not on one occasion, on multiple occasions, where as you mentioned, I also work on the history of the Bayanis, the Azali Babis. And I've sent some translations and analysis. This one particular article I sent to the Welt Islam in 2017. entitled The Organization of Hierarchy of the Babis in the Period of Subh Azal's residency in Baghdad, which basically, through even the evidence of Baha'i text itself, demonstrates that the Baha'i position on early Babi history is complete whitewash. And it got rejected, and it got sent to these Baha'i peer reviewers, two of whom I actually later identified who they were. And they managed to convince this editor-in-chief with completely sectarian and ad hominem arguments to reject publication. And this has happened to me again and again and again and again. Even the content is good. Doesn't matter. So the academy is politicized. It's completely politicized. Who gets to represent what is more important than what is represented. And, you know, there's also, you know, I've referred in my own podcast to the writings of this, in my opinion, very important social theorist by the name of Charles Mills, who wrote a very influential book in the late 90s called The Racial Contract, where he basically rips apart the whole notion of Rousseau's social contract vis-a-vis the experience of colonialism and imperialism. Basically says that where the West is concerned, we're dealing with a racial contract, not a social contract. And but I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but this is a very important book. But this has been my experience, where, you know, the bulk of academia in disciplines such as Islamic studies, etc., are either white or Uncle Toms. You know, so you have to be one or the other. And if you hold an independent line, if you assert the integrity of this material too much, you get sidelined and blacklisted by the system. And it doesn't matter whether you have a PhD or not. So in my opinion, you know, even though I started on the whole PhD route, because of the politics I experienced in the academy in the Ivory Tower, you know, at the time in the 90s, I decided that, you know, I just didn't want to deal with this sort of thing, because it meant that you had to sell out your own integrity in the process. You became basically part of this bazaar of Western capitalism.
Yeah, you wrote something on that. That's on your.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, why I'm not a PhD.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's an interesting document, but I haven't read this book called The Racial Contract, but I do think, for example, in the case of Islamic philosophy is not really taught as philosophy. It's taught as history, or as some sort of antiquarian, or, you know, some bizarre Talmudic exegesis or something. It's never really presented as philosophy that you can take seriously as philosophy. But I think that's true of other philosophies as well. If we want to talk about, let's say, world philosophy, I think that's also true of Chinese philosophy, for example, or Indic philosophy. And in fact, there's an interesting book. I think I got it here. It's called Taking Back Philosophy, a Multicultural Manifesto by Brian W. Van Norden. And there's a foreword by J.L. Garfield. You know, Van Norden is expert in classical Chinese philosophy and language. And Garfield is a specialist in Buddhist, especially, I think, Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. And I think they had written some sort of an op-ed piece in some online incarnation of the New York Times, in which they were talking about how it's important to look at world philosophy. And there was a massive negative reaction to that. And then, you know, they wrote this book, which I just got, and I'm going through it. But it's certainly true that, you know, if you can even find a course on Ibn Sina, it's not Ibn Sina's philosophy or Ibn Sina as a philosopher. It's maybe everything else, or everything but.
Yeah.
And it's almost the last thing in the world that would occur to that kind of a mindset, that maybe we should pay attention to what this man had to say, and maybe he has something to say to us and to our particular historical moment. Instead, it's all sorts of obscure manuscript studies. And I think manuscript studies are important, but, you know, that's what you sort of find in terms of Ibn Sina, with the Gutas crowd.
Yes.
And the people who studied with Gutas, I think it was Reisman, who did this overly erudite work on these treatises of Ibn Sina. But that's what you find. And honestly, I still think that when it comes to someone like Mullah Sadr, for example, to this day, really the only comprehensive study of Ibn Sina, of Mullah Sadr in English that's actually worth really reading is still Fazl Rahman, because he actually sat down in his office in the University of Chicago Oriental Institute, read through all 9 volumes, was an expert on Ibn Sina, and he actually understood what he was writing. You know, I mean, so
I also like Christian Jambé's The Acts of Being. I thought that The Act of Being, that was not a bad book, I thought. I mean, it has its gaps and problems, but I didn't think it was a bad book overall. I don't know if you've read it.
I'm not as convinced on Jambé. I don't think it was as successful. I do think that Fazl Rahman at least gives you a complete overview of the whole system. And, you know, Jambé, we'll have to agree to disagree. I think in terms of just dealing with Tashkīk al-Wujūd, you know, Sajjad Rizvi's is an important work in the field, but it's addressed you know, he really tries to take it serious as philosophy, but it's written very much to the analytic philosophy crowd. And so if you're not well versed in that, it's a very difficult read. But I think it does a good job of at least making it presentable as philosophy to the analytic crowd.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was not our topic. We're supposed to be Suhrawardī. So
well, I mean, this is all pertinent.
Yeah. Well, so you don't have any serious study of Suhrawardī either.
No,
I mean,
not really.
In the case of Mullah Sadra, you've got, you know, these different books. You've got a lot of people interested in Avicenna or Ibn Sina, but you don't really have an interest in Suhrawardī. Now, to what would you attribute that? Why do you think that is?
Well, look, one of the conversations I had with Hossein Ziai in his office was particularly about that. Is that he was saying that we need to make these figures more respectable and palatable to the philosophy crowd of philosophy departments in Western universities. And so, you know, that it behooved people after him who came working on Islamic philosophy to be able to craft and make Suhrawardī palatable to the people in the philosophy department of UCLA. But the fact of the matter is that most of that crowd, which in my opinion are not real philosophers, the only serious philosopher that they would consider would be Immanuel Kant. I mean, even continental philosophy to this crowd is not really philosophy, let alone, you know, philosophy coming from the Islamic world or the East or anywhere else. Now, you referenced that book about that book that you showed before about reclaiming philosophy. Yeah, this one. Taking back philosophy. Hamid Dabashi had a very interesting back and forth shouting match with Slavoj Žižek, and he published this in a book called Can Non-Europeans Think?
That was back in 2014?
Yeah, 2014. At least what is being presented in this discussion is extremely important for other people to look at, because what it lays bare is that within these Western institutions of higher learning, and particularly in these disciplines that you have, that they're not going to take any of this seriously because there's already a biased assumption that the reason why we have these disciplines is basically to gather knowledge, gather information about the mechanics of various cultures. So in other words, the ivory tower in the West is basically an extension of imperialism. You know, so, and this is why people like, for example, Henry Giraud are now referring to the military industrial surveillance media academic complex.
Yeah, gosh, that's a mouthful, but yeah.
That's quite a mouthful.
Yeah, but it does cover, the whole range, I guess.
So they're not looking at us in the East as even existential equals. You understand? And that's why they don't accord, Islamic philosophy the kind of platform that it deserves, the kind of study it deserves. Now, what I find interesting, going back to Suhrawardī, is that this dissertation by Lukáš Piatak breaks the mold, and it breaks the mold from this angle. Lukáš Piatak, from my understanding, is a crony of John Walbridge. And in fact, it was John Walbridge, according to Piatak himself, that first sent him the manuscripts of Suhrawardī's works that had the water, that at the very beginning of the dissertation, he actually claims that he was inspired to do this research because of Walbridge's article that was published in Ishraq, the one that we referred to before. But what Piatak has effectively done with this dissertation is basically proven Walbridge's entire thesis about Suhrawardī to be quite shallow, indeed. He's been forced, to go back to Korban and then follow the trails to the Mazdian text, to the Proclean text, and so on and so forth. And so Suhrawardī, the theurgist, is back, basically, with this dissertation.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if he publishes it. But I would like to just rewind a little bit and maybe disagree with you a bit on what you said about what was that whole mouthful? The military industrial
surveillance media academic complex.
Okay,
Henry Giroux.
I wouldn't dispute that in many instances that academia has been and is and can be an extension of empire. But at the same time, I think there might be some simpler answers, and it's not one or the other, but it's a convergence of these two, I would argue. Let's say a young person wants to study Islamic philosophy. Where are they going to go and who are they going to study it with? A young person in the West, let's say from a non-Muslim background. Some Muslims have a head start because they learn to read the Quran. So that's something, right? Okay. So this person has got to go and learn Arabic. He's got to learn Persian. He's got to learn these languages. That's hard enough. And then once you've been through this whole philological education, and that's already saying a lot. Getting into one of those universities where there's not a lot of places where that's offered. Who's teaching these courses? Where are you going to learn it?
Well, as of right now,
and let's say you and it's a huge learning curve. Let's say you get beyond the language learning curve, and you pick up Hikmatul Ishraq, or you pick up al-Isharat wa Tanbihat, or if you pick up any of the classic Islamic philosophy texts. There's a whole other linguistic hurdle there because these terms are used in a certain way. Do you think that Tom, Dick, and Harry, whoever they might be in these universities, how many people actually know what those terms mean?
Very few.
Right? Very few. So there's all these learning curves. And then let's say you somehow even get to that. You have to have, if you want to understand Ibn Sina, you have to have a good understanding of Aristotle. Who takes Aristotle seriously nowadays in Western philosophy?
Nobody.
Nobody. Supposedly you're educated, most people who are into philosophy, let's say, if you've read a little bit of Nietzsche and you've read Heidegger and Wittgenstein, that doesn't prepare you to read Mullah Sadr, does it?
No.
So there are all sorts of other hurdles, even if this whole empire discourse or dimension wasn't there.
But the question still remains: is knowledge production in Western universities a sort of taxonomizing industry of Western imperialism, where they get people to jump through all these hoops and hurdles, and whoever comes out the other end with the PhD, gets the prize.
I don't even know what this phrase knowledge production means. A lot of people use it, but knowledge isn't produced. It's not an industrial process.
But we know that. But in the West, and in the capital, under capitalism, under neoliberal capitalism, right? Everything is a product, right?
This is most unfortunate. It's not.
Yeah, this is extremely unfortunate. I'm not saying this is a good thing at all.
You're talking about the commodification of everything, the monetization.
The commodification of knowledge, especially with the Western Ivory Tower. And so area disciplines, right, being responsible for their particular area, are producing a product. And hence, we have a knowledge production.
Okay, and if that's what that means, if no one's ever really explained that to me. Thank you.
That's basically what it means.
Yeah.
So, and which is then specific to these various area disciplines, and with obvious gatekeepers at every door, side door, what have you. And as we know, money sets the agenda, and universities not only raise money from the public purse, but nowadays everywhere in the West, private foundations and interested foundations, whatnot, also funding projects. I didn't know this until, for example, recently, that one of the ways that these journals with open access are getting around this whole thing is that they're making a lot of authors pay for their own publications, even though the research that is being published in these open access journals is being funded by the public purse. That blew me away when I found that out,
Well, no, I think you do have that's a very important point. I mean, why it's very different now in the modern world. I mean, when Nasiruddin al-Tusi wrote his commentary on al-Isharat wa Tanbihat, he wasn't trying to make a buck. and he wasn't trying to get tenure, and he wasn't trying to impress his colleagues. And I don't even think the book would have circulated widely, because Ibn Sina makes it very clear in the Isharat. He says, don't share this book of mine with, this writing of mine with people who are unworthy. And so the whole notion of knowledge and writing books was quite different than it is today, because people are writing it to make a buck, or the publisher is trying to, and they're doing it in academia, at least, to get tenure, to go from assistant to associate, or from lecturer to reader, or to professor, to impress their colleagues, to pursue this whole path of careerism. And there's very few people there who are really, fulfilling the teaching of Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he said that طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ أَوْجَبُ عَلَيْكُمْ مِنْ طَلَبِ الْمَالِ, that the seeking of knowledge is more obligatory upon you than the seeking of wealth. How many people actually go to university because they really want to know? Very, very, very few. And so,
well, you and I were amongst that crowd. We really wanted to know.
I think we're very much in the minority, and we mustn't forget that the age in which we live, and it is what it is. Look around. But anyway, so coming to the question of books, when Suhrawardī wrote Hikmat al-Ishraq, there's an interesting passage which I'm sure you're very familiar with, and I want to just call attention to it. So, well, there's actually two passages, but let's go with the one at the end first. There's one that I like very much at the beginning. I think it's at the beginning. This one actually might be, well, the one at the end that I have in mind is that when he's completed the book, he says in Arabic, وَرَأَيْتُ الْأَسَدَ وَالثَّوْرَ قَدْ غَابَا, right? وَالْقَوْسَ وَالسَّرَطَانَ قَدْ طُوِيَ فِي طَيِّ تَدَاوُرِ الْأَفْلَاكِ وبقي الميزان مستويا إذا طلع النجم اليماني من وراء غيوم رقيقة متألفة مما نسجته عناكب زوايا العالم العنصري في عالم الكون والفساد. That's very, very interesting. So what he's basically saying is that when he's completed the book, there is a particular planetary configuration. And I think I worked this out
the passage
years ago. Yeah, it's on page 290 of the Qurban edition, volume 2.
This is at the end of the book here.
It should be at the end of the book. I don't know why at the top of the heading it says قصة الغربة الغربية. Oh no, it is in the قصة. I read the wrong passage. I read the passage in قصة الغربة الغربية as well.
This is the translation from Walbridge and Ziya, the passage that Nizam just read.
No, in Hikmat al-Ishraq, I'm sorry, it's on page 258. He says, فرغت من تأليفه في آخر جماد الآخرة من شهور سنة 82 و500 في اليوم الذي اجتمعت الكواكب السبعة في برج الميزان في آخر النهار. I am sorry. So he
says, I exhort you to preserve this book, to keep it safe and guarded from those unworthy of it. God is my successor ruling over you. I completed its composition on the last day of the month of Jamad al-Akhirah of the year 582. On the day the 7 planets were in the sign of Libra at the end of daylight.
Exactly. So
give it only to one who versed in the methods of the peripatetics, a lover of the light of God. Let him meditate for 40 days.
40 days, exactly.
Abstaining from meat, taking little food, concentrating upon the contemplation of the light of God, most mighty and glorious, and upon that which he holds the authority to teach the book shall command. The Qayyim bil-Kitab. Right,
the Qayyim ul-Kitab. So there's two things here, and I'm sorry I just turned to the wrong, because I had 2 passages marked here, and I turned to the wrong one. So this at the end of Hikmat al-Ishraq, which is again 582 of the Hijrah, when the planets are aligned in Libra. So I worked this out some years back, that this should correspond to the 16th of September, 1186 at 17:27 and 45 seconds Aleppo time.
So 5 in the afternoon.
Yeah, 5 p.m., 5 in the afternoon. Now, it's very interesting that these 7 planets were all aligned in the constellation of Libra, and then in the Waridat and Taqdisat, he's got these invocations addressed to the 7 planets. So what I'd like to ask you is,
Sure.
you know, how do you understand, what is your understanding of Suhrawardi's understanding of planetary intelligences? That's one, or angels. Because there is this notion in ancient philosophy, going all the way back to Aristotle, of, what do you call them? Al-uqul al-mufaraqa in English. Non-corporeal intelligence.
Non-corporeal intelligence,
yeah. And it has some relationship with his proof for the existence of God as being the unmoved mover, but people confuse that. It's not really unmoved. It's, you know, it means the one who's not subject to change, who is not a division into act and potency. And you have the heavens. Well, they move. Motus is change, and motus would in the Latin of the scholastics. I'm not sure what he said in Greek. And so the only kind of change that the planetary planets and the planetary spheres are subject to is change, is motion.
Motion.
And otherwise, they aren't subject to corruption. And the only way you can explain this motion is that each planet itself has its own unmoved mover, and it's a disembodied intelligence. And so, you know, somehow people have the idea that an angel is somehow dragging or pulling or the planet, or is the planet itself a sentient being? You know, so how do you understand this, and how does Suhrawardi understand that? That's my first question. It's a big question. And the second question, this whole idea about fasting, and you know, that this book is not written for all and sundry, and that, you know, it can really only be had from the Qayyimul Kitab. So what do you understand by the Qayyimul Kitab?
That's a great question. I've been contemplating both of these questions. The first question is actually straightforward. The literal physical planets are not the angels. They are the theurgies of the entities, the arbab, the lords of the species. So that the planets are the theurgies of these lords of the species, as it were.
What does it mean?
Because just remember,
sorry, what does it mean when you say that a planet is a theurgy?
It's or let me put it another way. It's that the planet is a sort of is a kind of entelechy of the spirit.
It's an entelechy,
of the spirit behind it that moves it, as it were. Because, you know, so are these notions of angelology. It's not that there's angels out there. There's nothing. You don't find the angels out there, right? It's in the inner world where the reality, the instantiation of the angels are known. So, you know, the material world being a sort of I use the word Plotinus uses tolma, of the spiritual world, of the suke, right? These angels, or the angelologies, the archetypes of them are the animates that animate the actual physical planets. So they're the signatara.
You use the word entelechi, and that's a word with a huge history.
Yeah, I know. So I use that very hesitatingly. Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, do you use it in the same sense as Aristotle, or are you using it in the same sense as the Muslim peripatetics?
I'm using it in the same sense as the Muslim peripatetics, but even then one has to be careful, because what Suhrawardi means by it is much more refined.
Because
just remember,
peripatetics, with the exception maybe of Ibn Rushd, never used the word antalashia.
Yeah.
They used it with reference to the soul.
Yes.
And they would say that it's the first perfection, kamalun awwalin, etc., etc. Yeah. It's the first perfection of an organic body.
Just remember that where this organon is concerned on definitions, Suhrawardi rejects real definition. He throws that out, right? Because his knowledge is by presence. So el-mahuduri by definition. So these definitions, real definitions that the parapatologic logic deals with, are not, you know, are rejected by Suhrawardi.
Right.
So the planet, it is something, in a way, let's put it this way. The planet is the material symbolization of the angelic intelligence. Right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But so we can, you know, pray to it insofar as it is the symbol of the being, of the intellectual being.
Okay, when you say pray, what would be the word in Arabic? Because he doesn't yusalli ala or ya'budu. What does he do?
Dua. He da'a. He calls.
He da'a yad'u. He invokes.
Invokes it.
Supplication. You're right. Okay.
Supplication.
Yeah.
So this is the way that Suhrawardi kind of understands this. It has a sort of quasi-pagan resonance to it.
It sure does. You know?
Yeah. But by the same time, perhaps this is one of the reasons they had a problem with it.
Yeah.
But you also have to go into Suhrawardi's sources, because these various lords of the species, which are angels, right?
Yeah.
In the Zoroastrian worldview that Suhrawardi is very much incorporating into all of this. You know, not just the planets, not necessarily the planets, but the elements all have lords of the species. So you have the lord of the species of fire, of earth, of water, etc. And what Suhrawardi is doing is basically looking at these planets as a sort of lord of species on the horizontal level of emanation, because the longitudinal level of emanation leads into the other worlds, the world of the Malakut. This is the sphere beyond the fixed stars, etc. So these are in essence, the planets are the material signatara of the higher intelligences.
Signatara?
So we're not localized. They're signatures.
Right.
You know, we're not localized. The intelligence are not localized, but their symbols represent the planets, if you will.
All right. So I have this very important work for Suhrawardi studies. فرهنگ اصطلاحات آثار شیخ اشراق شهاب الدین سهروردی و سید محمد خالد غفاری. I don't know what you think of this book.
It's very good.
But he is equating under the heading Rabbun Naw', so Lord of the Species. He puts in parentheses Arbab Asnam.
Yes.
So is the Rabbu Sanam or Arbab Asnam in the plural form the Lord of the, what would you call that? The Lord of the
idol. I mean, Sanam means idol.
The lords of the icon.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Of the icons, yeah.
What would you? Yeah, I'm not sure how we would render that. And I'm sure Korban would have a really cool way of doing it. But
well, he would call it the master of the iconophany.
Right. So how do you? So is there a difference? Are they the same? The Rabbu Sanam then is the same as the Rabbu Naw'.
That Rabbu Sanam is basically these are the Arbab Asnam, or the lower level Arbab Naw'. So the of the elements, particularly the materialized elements.
Okay, but is that different from Sahab Sanam, if you use the Persian form? Sahab Sanam.
Sahab Sanam would be the singular.
Well, no, there's Sahab and then there's Rab.
Well, this is the difficulty in Suhrawardi, is that the
same,
difference between Sahib and Rab are kind of synonymous. Right? Yeah.
Because here he says, Sahab Sanam Haman Rabbun Naw' ast. So the Sahab Sanam is exactly the same as Rabbun Naw'. So he's used them interchangeably.
Interchangeably, yeah.
Yeah, very confusing.
Yeah. You get a lot of that in the Hikmat al-Ishraq. This is why, from commentator to commentator, there are sometimes some very radical takes from these various passages. Yeah. I personally like the commentary of Shahrazuri the best. On the Hikmat. It's the first, but I think Shahrazuri's commentary is more keeping with the spirit of Suhrawardi himself than, say, Qutbuddin Shirazi's or even Jalal Davani, although Jalal Davani did the commentary on the Hikmat al-Nur. But that early commentary, that first commentary on the Hikmat al-Ishraq is probably closer, in my opinion, to what Suhrawardi's intention is.
What direction do you think that Qutbuddin Shirazi takes it in, which isn't as...
He over-rationalized it. He really over-rationalizes Suhrawardi.
Yeah, I got that impression as well.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I think that one is more readable. I don't know.
And he also argues a lot with Suhrawardi. He has a lot of arguments with Suhrawardi in these comments that he puts on these various passages. It's actually quite humorous in certain. I mean, it's very dense commentary, but it also gets very funny in certain places where he disagrees and
right.
Well,
coming back then to this whole idea about the planets. So why for Suhrawardi is it important to have invocations of these planets? Why is this part of his theurgy? And obviously it's a really big deal that they were all lined up in Libra when he finishes the books. It's like they're all in one place, at least in terms of zodiacal longitude. Obviously they can't all be on top of one another. But
because the schema of Suhrawardian metaphysics is hierarchical, right? There is not a direct line between, for example, humanity and the Godhead. the Nur al-Anwar, the lights of lights.
The light.
There are stages of intermediaries. And the planets then represent, symbolically represent these 7 stages leading up to the God of gods, the Ilah al-Alaha, the Nur al-Anwar.
Yeah, so how do you explain a term like the God of gods in Islamic context?
Yeah, this is a very pagan, I've pointed this out before.
You do find phrases which I think many Muslims would kind of stop and look at it and wonder what's going on here. And not just Muslims now, but I think Muslims in his time as well, which is maybe why he had some problems. I mean, I don't know how these things were, if these were widely disseminated. I mean, we can discuss, what really led up to his execution later, but on this point, how do you explain a term like Ilahul Aliha?
Well, first of all, there is an already existing pedagogy. You will find this term in Ibn Wahshiyah in the Nabatean agriculture. So, and I've actually run into it in all kinds of occult texts that are not Suhrawardian at all, the God of gods. Mm-hmm. For Suhrawardī, right, each level above represents a lord. The lord of each level above the one that we're in is also, in a sense, a god to the one below it, because it is transmitting the energies and the lights and the emanations from the levels above it, which lead to the Godhead.
Yeah, so this is like the notion of a kind of chain
of being. Yes.
I had this discussion with our mutual friend Habib Shahbazi as well, and he mentioned that this goes back to Proclus when I was talking to him. And
that's right.
If you refer to this work on Proclus, I'm not sure how you pronounce this. Radic Chlup, CHLUP, Proclus an introduction. He talks about vertical chains in chapter 3. Perhaps more or less along the lines of what you're describing. And this whole movement of the souls as well, which is mentioned in the Phaedrus myth in Plato. So this is a kind of, would you say, a kind of planetary theurgy in which you kind of have an ascent of the soul through this great chain of being and a kind of reassimilation, return, al-mabda wal-ma'ad kind of idea, right? Origin 100%. And return to the, exactly if we don't say God of gods, but at least to the origin, to the principle.
To the principle, yeah. But this is also a Zoroastrian thing, because with the Zoroastrian cosmology, there is Ormazd, the Ahura Mazda, and then there's the Amara Spentai, the 7 archangels that emanate, that are hypostases of the Godhead.
7 angels. So are those the same 7 angels which we find in Islamic theurgical, Quranic theurgical works, like of al-Buni, for example?
They have been compared, to that, but
they don't have the names don't correspond, or do they?
No, these are Avestan names. These are. Let me see if I can find the names of all of these here.
Well, that doesn't mean that they necessarily refer to a different thing. And the same thing can go by a different name, right?
Which is the way the Suhrawardī approached all of this,
right?
With a very hybridized understanding of what these beings represent. Yeah.
So how do you think the Suhrawardī came to this? I mean, he claims very much, doesn't he, that what he is embodying and teaching is a reaffirmation of the leaven of the ancients, the Khamirat al-Azal, right? The leaven of pre-eternity. And in fact, he mentions people by name, ancient Greek sages and Persian sages. I don't remember the Persian sages, but for the Greeks, he mentions Agatha Daimon, for example. He mentions Empedocles, which I think is very interesting. In the context
Hermes.
of Kingsley's book.
Yeah. Hermes is a prophetic figure, which was also the case for the late Neoplatonists of antiquity, late antiquity Neoplatonists like Proclus that you just mentioned.
Sure. See, that's my question.
Yeah.
You can claim to be in the line of Proclus right now if you wanted to, and it's not a very believable claim because that all died out. So how is it that Suhrawardī can claim, when he at that time as well, that he is really sort of the inheritor, the varis, if you like, of ancient Hellenic, Hellas and Persia as well,
and Egypt,
and Egypt, yeah,
and India.
Does he say that too?
Yeah. Well, the claim is based on whatever mystical experiences that he was having. So the claim is a species of shat, these ecstatic sayings that many Sufis are well known for.
Mhm.
He also claims many of these Sufis, for example, Hallaj, Bestami, Tustari, in his silsila, together with this, whether mythical or not, lineage of priest kings that he claims, whom he calls the Khosrawaniyun. That there was a sort of religio perennis. Suhrawardī was using this concept, Javidan Khirad, long before, Gainon.
Well, long before Hossein Nasr. That's, I think,
Or Hossein Nasr, Gainon.
Likes Suhrawardī so much because of his own Shwanian project, but that's another discussion. But does he actually use the word Javidan Khirad? I mean, the word out there, in Miskaway's famous Al-Hikmatul Khalida, a famous book by Miskaway. So the phrase was out there. Did he actually use that?
Yeah. Javidan Khirad is the term that Suhrawardī uses,
My understanding is that it was actually a pre-Islamic text. There was an actual text, a kind of ancient mirror for princes, right? That went by this name, Javidan Khirad.
So which would have been certainly accessible or known about by Suhrawardī in some form.
It would have to have been known because Miskaway, when he does his, it was apparently already translated in Arabic. Then Miskaway gets it, incorporates it into his book, adds a bunch of wisdom sayings from the Islamic tradition and others, and then puts out this book, Al-Hikmat al-Khalida, which I really see as a companion volume to his book on akhlaq. So definitely it was out there because he's, I think, Miskaway is before him. Miskaway is a contemporary of Ibn Sina. He would be older than Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina was the younger man at the time. And Suhrawardī's born when, around 549?
Yeah. 1150-ish or so.
1153, I think I have here.
Yeah.
So
he was 38 years old when he dies.
So how does he die? What really is the charge? Is he just, he's charged with, various claims are made that he's allegedly claimed to be a prophet. That's what's out there. And he was too close to the son of Salah ad-Din, and he didn't like this. And then he just told him, get rid of this guy. But he wasn't beheaded in one of those sort of dramatic forms of execution. He just starved to death in his house under house arrest. Is that true?
Well, in a prison cell, or he was killed in a prison cell. We don't know exactly the actual circumstances of his death, but he was condemned to death by Saladin himself. After the Fuqaha charged him with various things, they instance, for example, his Rahim al-Qudsi, the very first section of the Waradat wa Tahdid as evidence of it. And these prayers to the planets, and just the overall project of Suhrawardī.
So they did get out. These writings.
They did get out.
They did get out.
His writings, because they were quoting from it. According to the author.
Who would he have transmitted them to? Was it the son of Salah ad-Din? Was he an initiate of his?
Yeah.
Or just a patron?
Malik Zahir Shah, he would have been transmitting these teachings, perhaps the text themselves to this prince.
Well, so how did these ulama get a hold of the right? I mean, I can't imagine Malik Zahir Shah would have given them up. Was it a servant that stole them, or is this just speculation?
From what we know, Saladin made an ultimatum to his son. Either hand this guy over for trial, or I will depose you myself personally. So he did, and the Fuqaha tried him for heresy. And it is unfortunate what happened to Suhrawardī, but there is credibility to the charge from the point of view of the Orthodox ulama. When you read what Suhrawardī is writing, in a sense, when he claims to be reviving the wisdom of the ancient, he's making a very similar claim to the Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him, about reviving the Dīn al-Hanif. So there are resonances and echoes that in fact this is what was going on. And then the charge that is made, which is then echoed in Bustan al-Jami, is that his disciples were actually calling him Rasulullah.
Really?
Yes.
Well, that would be an extraordinary thing. I mean,
Shahrazuri mentions this too. Yeah.
Well, that just can't be allowed, obviously. I mean,
whatever it was. I mean, Herman Landolt.
I can't imagine that he would have made such a claim. I mean, people who followers. There's all sorts of personality cults. There's cult of personality is common in history. That's possible, but I can't imagine Suhrawardī making such.
These are the charges. I mean, they're mentioned by several sources. My reading of it is a bit different. That he is, if anything, he was maybe claiming a station similar to what the Zoroastrians understand by the concept of prophet, which is vakshur. And a vakshur is not necessarily a figure of the level of Zarathustra, but he's higher than a priest. He's a completely God-realized.
I don't know this term vakshur. This is what?
Yeah. This is a Avestan term, for a holy man. Yeah. Herman Landolt has a very interesting theory that he presents right at the final section of his review of Wheeler Thaxton's translation of Suhrawardī's visionary treatise. It's called the Tales of Initiation, where he believes, and I think this is credible, that perhaps Suhrawardī was a crypto-Ismaili of some description, maybe not either a Fatimid or a Nizari, because a lot of the ideas in the Hikmat al-Ishraq, and even in some of the other books before Hikmat al-Ishraq, have a closer resonance to figures like Hamiduddin Kermani, Abu Yaqub Sajistani, even Nasir Khusro. These great medieval figures of Ismailism, and I think there's something to be said for that. Yeah, and Salah ad-Din at the time, he had just deposed the Fatimids.
He just deposed the Fatimids, yeah, and then
he had the Nizaris in Syria. Yeah,
yeah.
Had the Nizari Ismailis in Syria who were, kind of his
rivals.
Their rivals. Yeah. Yeah. So, Suhrawardī basically, when they maybe got pulled in to all of this intrigue.
Right.
He was there at the wrong time and ended up getting himself killed.
Well, there's absolutely no way the guy is just a straight-laced Sunni, right?
No,
so this idea about Shi'i affiliations, whether Ismaili, what sort they were, but he's definitely very much in the Shi'i camp. Is there any way to make an argument that he's a Twelver? Because people claim him as a Twelver, but there's just no evidence explicit in his writings that I know of. And again, I'm not an expert on, it's not someone I've devoted a huge amount of time to. I like to read him, but I haven't found any such thing. You've spent your life on this. Is there any evidence there that he's
he uses the terminology, he uses Batini terminology. For example, he refers to the prophets as notab, the speakers, right? This is an explicitly Batini term. Then this term that shows up again and again in the Hikmat al-Ishraq itself, the Qayyim bil-Kitab.
Exactly. Who is the Qayyim, and how would you translate Qayyim al-Kitab?
The keeper of the book.
So is that not the Imam?
Exactly.
Yeah. So you would agree that Qayyim al-Kitab is, without any doubt, a reference to the Shi'i doctrine of the Imam.
And which kitab? Are we talking about the kitab as in the Hikmat al-Ishraq, or are we talking about the Quran? Because if we're talking about the Quran, then the Quran and Natiq is the Imam, alayhi salam.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be Hikmat al-Ishraq, I would say.
Yeah.
Qayyim al-Kitab, Qayyim al-Kitab. I suppose you could say it's the Hikmat al-Ishraq, but it doesn't really fit with the whole context, does it?
Or maybe he was claiming, just like Hallaj was, maybe he was claiming the imamate, perhaps. I mean, these are things that need to be explored, and there is enough, information out there that there were, certain accusations. Now, whether the fuqaha, the Sunni fuqaha of Aleppo actually got it right or not, Allahu A'lam. But
well, I would like to offer an hypothesis, and maybe hypothesis is too grand a term, just a speculation. maybe it's something akin to Muhyiddin ibn Arabi's claim to being the seal of proximity, the seal of sanctity. There's various ways to translate Khatam al-Vilaya or Khatam al-Valaya. That's a whole other debate. Is it should we take it as wilaya or walaya? And that's a whole discussion. but maybe he was claiming something of that nature.
My guess is pretty much that is the case, but perhaps the terminology that was being used was a little bit more explicit at times. Because throughout the history of Islamic mysticism, we have had these incidents of
Indeed.
people making very high claims.
High claims, shathat,
Yeah.
shathiyat, whatever you want to, there's different translations of that. One translation I was just stuck in my mind was theopathic locution.
Yeah, I've used that a few times.
I don't know if that was that Carl Ernst who came up with that. I don't remember who that was, but or ecstatic utterance, I think, is Carl.
Yeah.
Ecstatic utterance is it's a little bit less grandiose, but so maybe this is what's going on. I really don't know. I think he's an absolutely fascinating figure, and there's still a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done on al-Suhrawardī. But now I'd like to, what do you think about the resonances between the kind of theurgy that Suhrawardī is espousing and that of Iamblichus? Some years ago there was a very interesting book on Iamblichus by Gregory Shaw.
I have it, yeah. Theurgy of the Soul.
And this whole discussion and correspondence between Iamblichus and Porphyry on the ancient mysteries. Because I do think, and Peter Kingsley also in his very important book, I just had it here, where'd it go? What's the title of the book? Oh, here it is. Sorry.
Mystery and Magic. Yeah.
Yeah. Ancient Philosophy, Mystery, and
Philosophy and Magic. Great book.
Empedocles and the Pythagorean Tradition. So, what do you think about the similarities? And I'm singling out Iamblichus for a reason, because Julian, the Emperor Julian, was unfortunately referred to as the apostate by Christians. He was trying to bring back the original ancient Greek religion of this whole theurgy and theosis. And Julian has these very interesting sort of, invocations or prayers or supplications to the sun, right? And the sun was seen as the great noetic symbol of the principle, shining up there in the sky every day, moving across the ecliptic. So Suhrawardī also has, right, an orison addressed to the sun, but he refers to the sun by an ancient name. Hurach. Now, I don't know if you're the expert on this. Is this Avestan? Is it probably, what is it? So maybe if you could address this fascinating commonality.
Well, the pronunciation is actually off because the Avestan is Kashetna Vareya, to Hurach. But by the time it gets to Hurach, the Suhrawardī becomes Hurach, which we get the modern Persian word from Derakhshan, which means Khorshid, etc. This prayer, which is a prayer to the sun, and it's for the day of Sunday, is something. It is absolutely beautiful. I've been reciting this every Sunday for years now myself.
Okay.
Just to maybe be amongst the camp of the Ishraqiyun, as it were. This is not the only one, because you also have the other 6 prayers for the days of the week that are very similar, and he uses these Avestan names, which I mentioned. Mr. Walbridge got wrong when it came to Venus. He couldn't actually read the manuscript correctly.
Well, again, Iamblichus was doing this kind of thing. Julian was interested in this. Obviously, the sun had an important place. They were invoking the other planets as well.
Yep.
I think you see this in Thabit ibn Qurra later.
Yes.
So I'm just curious to how do you see that? Are they doing the same thing? What's your observation?
They're doing the same. I think they're doing the same thing. I think, Suhrawardī is closer to Proclus's view about these things than he is to Iamblichus, because when you read the Mysteries of Iamblichus, at least from the translations that I've read, it's sometimes not clear whether the Sanam is what exactly in this relationship that Iamblichus is explaining to Porphyry. But with Proclus, it's very, the way that he unpacks this and explains this is more in keeping with the spirit of Suhrawardī, and actually then maintains the Neoplatonic version of Tawhid.
Mm.
You know, same with Suhrawardī. With Suhrawardī, you know, the Godhead is the container of everything, out of which everything proceeds. Nothing is its equal. So laisa kamithlihi shay. But nevertheless, you know, as we move down the hierarchy, you know, you know, each hierarchy has a relationship with the one below it.
Mm-hmm.
So the sun being the symbol of you know, the way he phrases it, Nayir Azam, you know, the most mighty light giver. This is a symbol, a signature of, you know, the majesty of the Jalali nature of God. The
mightiest luminaries, maybe how
the mightiest luminary, yeah.
Yeah.
The most mighty light giver, yeah. Nayir Azam. So, you know, physical things are, in a sense, reminders that dhikr, he uses that word dhikr right at the beginning of the Rahim al-Qudsi too. Mm-hmm. That how these, right after he mentions the Nayir Azam, about how these things remind us, the elements remind us of the majesty of the Godhead. So, and this is also the Zoroastrian approach to this thing, and it's also the Proclean approach to these things. Proclus also has a whole litany of prayers to plants and the waters.
That's right, he does.
Yeah.
And of course, Korban was onto all of that.
Yes, he was.
And it's a pity he wasn't able to, for whatever reasons, elaborate, investigate, and expound on these things at length in his magisterial style. I mean, I can, one of the most beautiful passages, I think, in another book on another person, The Creative Imagination, in the Sufism of Ibn Arabi, is this chapter called The Prayer of the Heliotrope.
Yes.
It has this very long quotation from Proclus. And really, I mean, as a text from the ancient Hellenic world, it really captures what namaz is about. You know, what namaz, what the salah, to use the Arabic word, really is. So it's a pity he wasn't able to investigate those things further. But now on Suhrawardī's Zoroastrian dimension, we've touched on the Greek dimension, and there's no way really to establish or prove that there's some sort of direct connection with Greece. You know, you talk about it's a mystical experience. He's somehow connected with these people on a supernatural level, let's say. It's probably the best explanation. In the case of Zoroastrianism, you could offer this, or the ancient sages of Iran, you could offer the same explanation. But the fact is that he is a Persian. He is an Iranian origin. And Zoroastrianism still was around when Suhrawardī lived. It's still around now, all right? But it was certainly around and it was available. So is he, you know, I mean, his whole name, right, is Shihāb ad-Dīn Yahya ibn Habash ibn Amirak. You know, so was Amirak, his grandfather, a Zoroastrian? You know, I mean, we have cases of Abu Hanifa's ancestors, you know, the famous or the infamous, depending on how you look at Abu Hanifa's legal doctrines. You know, he's from a Zoroastrian background. There's many people like that. So is it the same thing for Suhrawardī?
100% possible. Just remember that part of Iran where that village of Suhrawardī is located.
Where is it located in modern day Iran?
This is in it's not quite near inside Azerbaijan. It's just right between the borderlands between Kurdistan, Iranian Kurdistan, and Iranian Azerbaijan, where you have the village of Suhrawardī. In that volume that you have of the Korban and Nas critical edition, there should be a picture in one of these volumes of the village of Suhrawardī. It's a mountainous kind of region. The opening pages.
Maybe in one of the other volumes. I mean, because these are the ones that have been published under the Islamic Republic, so they may not necessarily have all the same pagination and all that. I'll have to, anyhow.
But that area, we know, you know, that even until maybe about 50, 60 years ago, there was quite active Zoroastrian communities with fire temples in that area.
So we don't know for sure, but he may well have been from a Zoroastrian background, not too far back.
Very possibly. And, you know, if you wanted to educate your child at that point.
We don't know about his father. Did his father become a Muslim, or was it his grandfather, or was it before? We have no idea, you're saying.
We have no idea. Yeah. But, you know, if they had converted to Islam and yet they wanted to educate their child, you know, they would send them just maybe somewhere like Maraghe, where Suhrawardī went to get educated. And then, you know, The child was ambitious, he was learned, maybe then found the company of Sufis, found a lot of resonances between the ideas and practices of the Sufis and his own Zoroastrian background. And the rest is history. It all came together in a philosophical project. Because I have a distant family member who actually comes from the Ibrahimi clan. These are the hereditary leaders of the Shīʿah school of Kirman.
Oh.
And she converted to Zoroastrianism from Islam. And,
wow.
you know, just 10, 15 years ago. And I asked her very specifically, well, she told me she went through an initiation process with a Mobed, with a Zoroastrian priest.
Mobed, yeah.
And the practices that she described to me that they put it through very much like a Sufi initiation, kind of, you know, you go through the exact same process, and they do something very similar to dhikr, using these Zoroastrian names of God.
Well, yeah, maybe there's something there, and with the whole Persianate Sufism and the Mazhab-e-Ishq and the Qalandars, and I don't know, this could all be connected on certain different ways and on different levels.
I mean, the Qur'an cites a hadith in one of the volumes of an Islam Iranian, although, you know, the pedigree of this hadith is a little bit dubious, where the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, actually claims Zoroaster as the prophet of love.
I see. Okay, that's very interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, fascinating.
And just remember, at least even into the Safavid period, Zarathustra was being claimed to be Abraham by many Muslim scholars.
I see. Well, that's
Sayyid Ahmad Alawi has a whole discussion of you know, the Abraham Zarathustra connection.
Well, that they were the same person. That's
that they were the same person. Yeah.
That's very strange.
Yeah.
Well, be that as it may or may not be. Do you think there's any connection between Suhrawardī's planetary or theurgy or his invocation of these planetary intelligences and astrology? Is there any?
Oh yeah.
Really? In what ways?
Definitely.
Would you say?
Well, I mean, you know, if you know what is going on any particular day, then you can, and this is implied in the Waradat and also in the Hikmat al-Ikshaf, then one can then design one's practice, because like the Testament says, you know, following the pattern of the stars, exactly when, you know, what has happened, the significance of events.
So are you supposed to do those invocations then at the appropriate planetary hour? Okay, because that's a simple matter. You just do it because it goes by the day, so you do it in the first hour. But does it mean you also do it at the 8th? You follow me? You start again, right? Or does he say, or you don't know?
He doesn't say. He doesn't. There's nothing there. I'm, you know, just breathing into it.
Are there people who have experimented with this?
I have sort of experimented with this, but you won't find other people talking about their own experiences around this stuff, unless you go into the occult texts specifically. You know, just put the Ishraqi stuff aside and go into the occult text, the various occult manuscripts, and you find this stuff.
Well, because you find in al-Buni, for example, he has, I forget the exact title now in Arabic, but he's got a whole thing for every day of the week, for every planetary hour. And I mean, you could pull it off. It's not that you would need a lot of time. You just have to know them by heart. And so in the beginning it would be difficult. I haven't tried it, but I thought about it once. But you know, you'd have to memorize all of these and then do them and then see what happens.
Well, you can do it with the names, the various names. You can break them down by their letters, you know, and then into the elemental, and then calculate the various hours at which the name should be invoked without even using a square. I've done that.
This is for Suhrawardī.
No, this is me. But you know, this is just from
Oh, for divine names.
Yeah, the divine names. Yeah.
Oh yes, of course. This is how it's done. Yes, one can do that. Yeah, that's understood. Okay. I was just curious. You know, I mean, if there's anybody besides your good self who is trying to work with these Suhrawardian methods. Because
they must be out there. I can't believe that, you know, I'm the only one out there that is actually practicing this, you know.
See, because when you talk about practicing, I mean, it just does come down to transmission. Like, for example, the things that I do, I have transmission for them, right? But when it comes to Suhrawardī, what happened to the transmission? I mean, it's not even clear why in the world Qutbuddin Shirazi is writing this commentary, or even with Shahrazuri, what's the connection to Suhrawardī after he died? Was there some sort of a ta'ifa, right? Some sort of a group, some sort of a brethren, confreres, who were passing this thing on? And then
Not that we know of.
Did that
So
survive?
The only conclusion is that the relationship is Tuli rather than Arzi.
Right,
Must be
right.
vertical
You
rather than.
can always do that.
You can do that.
Always do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in the manuscripts that you consulted, are they all clear enough? I mean, because really what we're left with then is a process of reconstruction, aren't we? Depending on
which is fairly simple.
Are they
simple
are they really different? Are they in a bad state? I've only seen Ayya Sophia and I've seen the Raghib Pasha, which you very graciously have shared with me. I haven't seen the others, but are they in a good state of preservation? There's not like insane amount of variance, right? It all more or less.
They're all more or less. I mean, it is. There are slight misreadings here and there from copyist to copies. Very slight. They're not too radical. But I use Ayya Sophia as the master text simply because it's the oldest that
it's
exists.
Very readable to me anyway. Yeah. I find it very readable.
So
I say legible. I meant legible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from there, using that as the master text or the stemma, as it were, then we can very easily then reconstruct it and use these other manuscripts to reconstruct what the Waradat actually is. And it's not a long text. One theory I have about the Waradat is that it's very possible that Suhrawardī may have written these within the margins of his own copy of the Hikmat al-Ishraq. So that it wasn't necessarily a separate text. And this is actually mentioned in a kind of an elusive way by Shahrazuri when he actually details the works of Suhrawardī. Really? So, okay, if this is if the Hikmat al-Ishraq is the chief, book of the illuminationist tariqah, the Ishraqi tariqah, then the practice would be immediately around the actual study of the text itself.
So it's like it's potentially then a khatima, a kind of conclusion or an addendum to the wisdom of illumination, Hikmat al-Ishraq.
Together with the Qissa Qurbat al-Qarabiyya, the tale of the Occidental exile.
Yeah, that's a very, very, very beautiful text. I mean, and I wish we had time to go into that one as well, but I think that's a very, I remember I first read that in translation many, many years ago, and it really made a deep impression on me and resonated at a very profound level. And I really think that, I hope that you will do some work on this and I mean, put these things together, and it's reconstructible, and people, whoever wants to, try it could try it, I suppose. But I really think that Suhrawardī needs to be more widely known, and more people need to work on it. It's interesting. My son, he's just a young teenager. He's about to graduate from high school. I told him as a good introduction to Islamic philosophy, he should read Sayyid Hussein Nasr's 3 Muslim Sages. And I know it's an old book and a lot of the stuff is out of date, but still, as a popularization, I think it's very good. So he spent a lot of time reading it, and I made him do a book review on each chapter. And then when he was done, I said, well, so who do you like the best? Who do you think really? And he says Suhrawardī. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, the whole illumination, the light, and all that. So he was also very, very inspired by it. So I do hope that you will, do some further work on this and bring these things out there, widen the circle of people who are able to, approach Suhrawardī as really he should be approached, because this whole dimension is just ridiculous how it's been covered over. And one maybe final question I have for you, it's probably the hardest one. What are those sigils at the end of the Ayya Sophia manuscript?
They're the planetary. They're supposed to be the planetary sigils.
They don't look like any sigils. I mean, do they?
They come close. Yeah, they come close to the few that you will find in the Kitab al-Shawq al-Mustaham of Ibn Wahshiyah. And remember, I actually asked this question of Walbridge when I put that review up the first time on the blog.
Sorry, I don't recall. No.
Yeah. but they are. When you look at the other manuscripts, they're pretty close to the the way some of these planetary sigils are laid out by Ibn Wahshiyah himself.
So, all right, but then that begs the question, what did he put them there for? What are you supposed to do with them and how do they relate to
He doesn't say what you're supposed to do with them, but that's kind of implied that you actually, are supposed to make maybe a circle, perhaps, of the sigils. I've done it before actually offering the prayer. So then the whole thing becomes a magical operation.
It becomes a theurgic operation. In my Islam, it becomes a theurgic.
Yeah, it becomes a theurgical operation where you begin by invoking the prayer to the perfect nature, the da'wah to Ba'atam, and then you stop, because that is the first intermediary on this on this ascent to the God of gods.
Okay,
begins with yourself, with the perfect nature of yourself.
Alhamdulillah, I'm glad you brought that up because I nearly forgot to ask that. That's actually even more important than the question of the sigil. So what is this perfect nature of Taba'atam? Now I understand that this is maybe a little bit of a sensitive topic because Qur'an also implies, if I'm not mistaken, that this is really a reference to the guardian angel.
Yes, it is. It's the Yazata, or the Zoroastrian term would be the Yazata that each individual has, the celestial guardian angel. Not Qareen, because the Qareen can be good or bad. The Yazata is good.
The Qareen is the jinnic twin or doppelganger I talked about recently in Glitch Bottle. It's not the same as the...
No. The Yazata is actually a celestial doppelganger.
Celestial doppelganger, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So is there any relation, because in astrology, horoscopic astrology, when you have the natal figure, there are different procedures and methods to determine the guardian angel by way of astrology. One of them is explained by Ibrahim ibn Azra, Abraham bin Ezra. He's got a method. There's another method which is connected with actually you flip around the part of fortune a certain way and you do this. And I don't want to go into all of this stuff, but people who are involved in astrology, they know this. So do you think that there's any connection with that, or are these two different? Because it's never been clear to me that the guardian angel that you arrive at through astrology is the same as what you're arriving at through theurgy. Because in the end, you come up with a planet, right?
Yeah.
At the end, it's going to be a planet. It'll be some sign or degree, and then you go to whatever rules that, and you're done. And it's one of the 7 planets again. So it comes back to our very first question. You've got the planet and you've got the angel. Mm-hmm. So did Suhrawardī see the perfect nature also as a planetary intelligence?
Yeah, so the perfect nature of the planet is the angel itself. Just like his perfect nature, is the celestial doppelganger. So the Khashetra Vareya of the sun, the Hurash, is actually the name of the perfect nature of the sun, if you want.
Right. So in this theurgy, you're undergoing this kind of ascent.
Yes.
And so if your perfect nature turns out to be, Venus, then that's the way you've got to go. And if somebody else is Mercury, then that's their ladder of ascent is different. Is this what you?
Well, he doesn't mention that, any of that specifically. I mean, I know the occult texts say this, but based on very brief commentary that he actually says about what the perfect nature is, that it's a luminous entity, right? That the experience of which only comes through riyada, through ascetic mortification, etc. Ascesis. So then, does this have a name? Is another question, because usually, these doppelgangers come with some kind of a name or a sign, at least within a cult text. But with Suhrawardī, no.
Yeah.
It's more straightforward.
So there's a lot in common there. Then I mean, then I think it's very, very similar to the ancient Greek, Platonic, Pythagorean sort of methods that we find in the ancient world.
Very much so. And that's why
it is a reaffirmation. It is the leaven of the ancients.
Yeah, it is. It very much is. I mean, to really understand what Suhrawardī is talking about, the perfect nature, that entire section of spiritual body and celestial earth, where Qur'an really unpacks the Fravashis and the Yazata, etc., that explains what Suhrawardī meant by it.
Yeah. And the interesting thing, I think, in celestial in spiritual celestial body and spiritual earth is that the earth also has an angel, because
Yes.
in the traditional system, that becomes an eighth angel then, right?
Yes. Spendarmat. Yeah.
So everything has angels then.
Everything has a perfect nature.
Everything has some sort of perfect nature. All right. So then if we're talking about these angels, and then there's this ascent that goes all the way up, and of course, all the way up to the, gosh, what was it?
Nur
Sahib
Isra.
Sanam and the, well, before you get to that, and the Rabb Nawa. And then
Yeah.
after the Rabb Nawa is what? Is the
Then the Ummahat, the world of the mothers, these are the various, they're also Arbab.
Mhm.
And then as you climb the ascents, then you come to the victorial lights,
right?
Anwar Isfahud.
So,
And as you climb higher and higher, then, the first intellect, which is Bahman. But the first, after with Suhrawardī, after you cross the terrain, of the planetary terrain, this is the point that one unites with the active intelligence, which is the Lord of humanity itself, right? The Aql Fa'al, which Suhrawardī equates with the Zoroastrian Sarosha, or the angel Surush, which he then equates with the Archangel Gabriel of the Abrahamic traditions.
Yeah, that makes sense. But this term, Rabbun Nawa, do you think that this is the same as the Akbari or Ibn Arabi term, Ayn Thabita, plural A'yan Thabita?
I look at it to some degree that way. The only difference is that these arbab are animate.
Yeah, that's the difference. And the same then if you talk about Platonic ideas or forms, the idea or eidolon, maybe in Greek, I'm not sure. They're also not animate to my knowledge. And with Suhrawardī, it's a living thing.
Yeah, it's a living thing. It's completely sentient, animate. Yeah.
And that's a huge difference. It's really fascinating. I really wonder, what happened. And you wonder about Mullah Sadr as well, because he's writing these very learned ta'liqat on the Hikmat al-Ishraq, and he's got the planetary invocations in the margins there, So you really wonder. It's clear, I think it's very clear that there is a kind of secret college, an occult sort of brotherhood, a hidden kind of sub rosa phenomenon that people, kept very close to themselves for obvious reasons. And one really wonders, we don't really know for sure what Mullah Sadra's practices were. And of course, he comes to a different conclusion, about the nature of existence and this whole question. But it was never problematized that way until his teacher, Mir Damad. Suhrawardī nowhere says that it's a salatul mahiyya. Nowhere says that it's that quiddity is fundamentally real. That's read into him later. And Mullah Sadr says, he has this experience, and then he changes his mind. Well, what was he doing out in that tiny village of, what is it called? Kahak? Yeah, when he was, sidelined by all of the brilliant ulama of his time. What was he up to all of those years? Ibn al-Arabi said something beautiful. He said, وَمَا زَالَتْ الْفُقَهَاء فِي كُلِّ زَمَانٍ مَعَ الْمُحَقِّقِينَ بِمَنْزِلَةِ الْفَرَاعِنَ مَعَ النَّبِيِّينَ. And the fuqaha continue to be in every age with those who are seekers of the genuine truth, the muhaqqiqun, just as the pharaohs were with the prophets.
Yeah,
he says that in his book Ruh al-Quds. So,
well, the Mullah Sadr, at the very conclusion of his Hikmat al-Arshiyya, calls them out as shayateen.
Yes, he does. And Hikmat al-Arshiyya is very, very strong against them. Very true. Yeah. So we see that this fate has, this has been the fate of all of the great muhaqqiqeen, the seekers of truth, Mullah Sadr, Muhyiddin al-Arabi, and certainly Shihāb al-Suhrawardī, who met his death in Aleppo at the age of 38 lunar years. Right. Well, I think we just wrap it up there. It was a really illuminating discussion, Wahid. I really appreciate you taking the time, and you're in a very, very different time zone to me. So it's a big, very gracious of you, and I wish you every success in all of your scholarly endeavors. And
Likewise.
I do hope that you will be able to bring to light these texts in a proper edition and with a very proper translation and commentary, and introduce Shaykh al-Ishraq, the Master of Illumination, and his work to a new readership, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.